Welcome back to the Road to National series. In today's episode, I'm going to take you through a lower max workout, and later in the video, I'm going to be talking to you about mobility and flexibility. But first, this is me building up to my max effort variation for the week, which is a banded deadlift. Now, I've never done a deadlift with this amount of band tension before. I've usually used higher amounts of band tension, and I was hoping to hit around 240 kilos of bar weight to 250 kilos of bar weight, somewhere around there, plus the 40 kilos of band tension. So I decided to lower up 250 kilos and just go for it. Now, I felt really good coming off the floor, but unfortunately, as I got to lockout, the bar just seemed stapled to the top of my thighs. Now, obviously, the band tension does increase as you go through the range of motion. So as soon as you stop in a banded lift, you almost impossible to lock it out, and my weakness is lockout anyway on the deadlift. That is my sticking point. So I came back to do this 240 kilo lift, and it was an absolute fight to get it locked out, mainly because I'd sapped so much of my energy on the 250 kilo lift, but managed to get it done. I think it would have been a lot cleaner and actually to powerlifting standards if I'd just gone for 240 in the first place, but happy with that max. So moving on to the accessories, I started off with cambered bar good mornings here. Now, I am allowing my back to round a bit. If you're noticing that and wondering why and thinking that good form is just to keep your back straight, having some element of back flexion and extension can be good. Particularly for me, what I'm trying to work on is extension of my back to help my deadlift lockout. I often get stapled at the top of my thighs like you saw in the 250 kilo max effort, with my back slightly rounded. Now, that is also a technical issue, and I do want to address my technique on deadlift. It is the most grip and rip technique style that I have. I haven't ever really tried to work on optimizing my deadlift technique. I've got short arms, so I do have to pull it a long way, but whilst that technique needs to be overhauled, just improving the strength at the top position is going to help as well. So that is why I'm doing this with the good mornings, trying to help that lockout power, and I am allowing that back to round a bit to get in some back extension as well as hip extension. Then after these, I move on to do single leg quad extensions. Now, I did these light and they felt fantastic because I've been working through my knee injury. If you kept up with the series, you'll know that. And I've been doing some heavy isometrics, which has helped build and retain strength in my quads whilst I'm trying to rehab my knee. However, my knee has been feeling really stiff recently, and I think that's because I haven't been training it through a range of motion. So just isolating it, doing single leg work, doing it light and doing it through a full range of motion felt fantastic today, and my quads were absolutely burning at the end of these sets as well. So I'm just building up the capacity of the quads with the set of 15 and then 12, I think, on the second set. So that was the reason I did those. Then I moved on to calf raises, then roller hip abductions. Now, that little roller that I use for hip adductions, which is where I sort of lower myself almost into the splits and then try and pull up, I found that to be so effective for my hip adductors on the insides of my legs. But I suddenly realized if I just rig up a really hard band, I can also use that roller for hip abductions, which is what I do today, and it was really successful. I've never had a burning in the outside of my glutes like it from banded hip adduction, so abduction, sorry. So that is what I will be doing going forward, and I suggest you copy it if you don't have access to a hip abduction machine. They're amazing if your gym does have one of those, but if you're in a home gym like me or your gym doesn't have one, I would suggest getting a little roller, rigging up a band and doing it the way I do it. So to end off, I then did kettlebell tibialis raises. Now, I don't think these are essential for powerlifting, but the reason I did it is I had one more accessory programmed. It was a miscellaneous lower exercise, so any sort of lower that I felt needed work on, that's what my last accessory was programmed to be. But I have been so fatigued recently. I think I've been training a little bit too hard. I've redone my program to have less sets and less total weekly volume, and that has caused me to train absolutely all out for every single exercise and every single accessory, and it has built up a lot of systemic fatigue even in the few weeks I've been doing it. So I think I need to just adjust my training a little bit, and when there are opportunities like today where the last exercise was just whatever I fancied, doing something like kettlebell tibialis raises, it's still working a little bit on the lower body, but it wasn't going to add to the fatigue that I have accumulated recently. So that's why I chose those. Now, whilst those accessories are playing in the background, I'm going to talk to you about mobility and flexibility. So first of all, to define the two terms, what is the difference? Mobility is basically your available range of motion through different joints, just through your body in general. So your hip mobility is how mobile your hip is, how much you can move your femur around in your hip joint. Flexibility is specifically your muscles' suppleness or elasticity. So how much can you stretch your muscles? Mobility can be limited by either skeletal limitations or by lack of flexibility. So for example, my shoulders are really immobile, but that is entirely down to the fact that I have never stretched or built up flexibility in the muscles. They're just immobile through basically negligence on my behalf, and I've allowed them to just get tight muscularly. However, my hips are immobile, and that is not because my leg muscles are tight. I used to try and stretch my hips all the time. The issue is a skeletal one. The ball and socket of my hip, the socket joint, seems to stretch quite far around the ball, and it will literally just hit a wall. And I know it's not a flexibility issue because I know what it's like to feel a stretch in the muscle. That's not the feeling I have. It's literally like bone on bone. So your mobility, your total range of motion can be limited by skeletal matters. Obviously, you cannot overcome them with any training unless you're planning on getting surgery and like grinding down your sockets or whatever, which is obviously not realistic. But the other thing that can limit mobility is your flexibility, and that 100% can be overcome. So the main way of improving your flexibility is, of course, stretching. So the first thing I'll say about stretching is do not do like deep stretching when you are warming up. I spoke more about warm-ups in yesterday's video, and I talked about this more in depth, so if you want to go and see that, check that video out. But the reason you don't want to deep stretch before warming up is it will, one, reduce your strength. There have been studies to show that if you are stretching, it can lead to acute reducing in strength. So it's not going to reduce your strength chronically. Like if you stretch before working out one day, it's not going to still affect you a week later, but it will affect you for your workout on that day if you stretch at the beginning of your workout. But the main reason why I wouldn't advise stretching at the beginning of your workouts is it's going to increase your injury risk if you're stretching when your muscles aren't warm. Your muscles are almost like chewing gum, and if you think of cold, unchewed chewing gum, if you try and stretch it, it's brittle and it will snap. Versus if you warm up, that is like chewing the chewing gum for a bit and then it becomes stretchy. Your muscles will be more flexible once they are warm, but also less likely to get injured because of that, because you're not trying to stretch a cold muscle. The only type of stretching that I think you can do when warming up is dynamic stretching. So that is you sort of swinging your legs, swinging your body part through a range of motion. You'll often see athletes doing this on the sidelines when they're warming up to come on if they're a substitution in something like rugby or football or American football or any sport like that. And you'll see it before the game. That type of stretch can be good, particularly if you are going to do something where mobility is a limiting factor. So if you're doing something like a cambered bar bench press at the beginning of your workout and your chest is not flexible enough and mobile enough to hit that deep cambered bar position right from the beginning, doing some dynamic stretching can be good. Moving your chest quickly, sort of flinging your arms out to the side, that can be fine, but I wouldn't sit in like a deep chest stretch before you've actually warmed the chest up. The best way, however, to get mobile is not just to stretch muscles. So I would do your stretching at the end of a workout, just to clarify. Once your muscles are warm, maybe you do some cardio at the end of your workout and then stretch, or you can just go straight into stretching. But the best way to get mobile is not just to stretch. You can actually massively increase your mobility by working on your strength through a range of motion. So to take the camber bar bench press for an example, if you are struggling with mobility in that, one of the things that can happen is as you try and hit that deep stretched position, your body is not confident, it's not strong in that position, and you can tense up and seize up and be worried about hurting yourself basically in that position. It's a natural reaction. However, if you just do maybe board press type presses to begin with, that's a very low range of motion for the chest and the shoulders. Then you do normal bench pressing. Then you do maybe some dumbbell presses where you're slowly overloading it. You could do this week after week and build up to the camber bar bench press. My camber bar is a 4-inch camber, which is really deep. And when I first started doing it, I did struggle to get that camber bar to touch my chest. But over time, through building up my strength through the range of motion, I can now easily achieve that mobility. So it's not just about the flexibility of the muscle. Often the muscles can appear less flexible because you're actually weak through that range of motion and you're tensing up. So it could actually be your weakness through a range of motion and lack of confidence that could be leading you to be immobile. The next thing to say is, when it comes to squats specifically, just as a small hack, you can buy elevated heel shoes and that can overcome ankle mobility issues massively. That is why Olympic weightlifters and loads of squatters in powerlifting wear weightlifting shoes and elevated heel shoes, because it means that you need less flexible or less mobile ankles. A quick note though to say is that elevated heel shoes are not going to completely fix your squat technique and allow you to squat like a Chinese weightlifter. That is also their leverages. The fact that they've got really short femurs allows them to squat like high bar and really upright. Even with elevated heel shoes, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to replicate that squat technique. However, it will aid your ankle mobility and allow you to get deeper into dorsiflexion, which is where you send your knees over your feet, without actually increasing your ankle mobility itself. It's just the shoes. The last thing to say about mobility is that sometimes a lack of mobility can actually help you. To take the squat for an example, in powerlifting, you just have to break your hip crease to be lower than your knee. Any range of motion further than that is wasted. So if you're immobile, you can actually bounce just into that powerlifting depth position. It's going to allow you to bounce up and use your stretch reflex higher up in the range of motion, which would help you a little bit. The same with things like arm wrestling, where they have like bent arms. Not being able to stretch their arm is actually an advantage. But in general, I'd advise trying to get as mobile as you can. So that is it for today's video. I hope you did in fact enjoy the video. If you did, drop it a like, drop it a comment, subscribe, click the bell, and thanks for watching.